and welcome to the first spiral rib tube sock knitting lesson. Let's jump right in. So we're going to start with the Turkish cast on. We're just going to do a single cast on to start with, just so you can get familiar with the cast on. And then once we've done that, we're going to go ahead and show you how to do it with the double cast on. So we're going to start out with a slip knot. We're going to take our needles and have the tips pointing in the right direction. We're going to put the slip knot on the bottom needle point. Then we're going to take the yarn end, secure the tail like that so it doesn't slip around while you're wrapping. And we're just going to wrap the yarn around the two needles together, half as many as the cast on stitches we need. We need 8 stitches in total, so we're going to wrap it around 4 times. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And that motion is very important, the way you go up the back and then around to the front. So now we have 4 loops, and we're just going to tuck the yarn end between the needle tips, just like that. Okay? Now, let's jump into the magic loop portion. So we're going to take our top needle tip here, and we're going to pull it out and swing that tip around just like that so that you can use both needle tips. I'm going to move this a little closer to the tip, and actually this we're going to move up and towards the back. And now we're going to start knitting through the back of each loop. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now once you get to the slip knot, you're not going to knit it, you're just going to slip it and leave it there for now. The slip knot is not actually considered one of our cast on stitches. In fact, eventually we're going to slide it off, but we're not going to do that just yet. So now we're going to drop this needle tip. We're going to grasp the needle tip with the live stitches, and we're going to start pulling the cable so this needle slides into place with the other loops. Then we're going to swing the tips so they are again pointing to the right, and we are going to knit these loops. So we're going to pull this needle tip out, swing it around, grab our yarn, and knit these loops through the back loop. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And that is a completed cast on. So again, sorry, that's noisy. We're again going to pull the cable and slide that needle into the stitches. Again, we're going to turn to the right, and now we're going to knit these. We're going to start the first round, and one thing I'm going to do, eventually you're going to want to mark the beginning of the round because these stitches are going to be identical on each needle. So what I like to do with the yarn tail is I just like to kind of pull it to the other side. This is the wrong side here. You can tell because it has these bumps. So I'm going to pull the yarn tail over to the wrong side, and I'm just going to tuck it here just to let me know where the beginning of the round is. So now we're going to again pull this needle tip out, and we are going to start this round by knitting in the front and back of every stitch except the slip knot, and I'll show you what we're going to do with the slip knot when we get there. So we're going to knit front and back, knit front and back, knit front and back. I slowed that down just a little bit in case you're not familiar with knitting front and back. Knit front and knit back. And now we're to our slip knot, and we're just going to drop it off the needle. And you can go ahead and pull that slip knot out. Okay, So I've dropped the other needle tip, and we're again going to pull that cable. Okay, that is why you're supposed to grasp the needle tip that has the live stitches, which I did not. If you do that, don't panic. Just very carefully put the tip back through the stitches. The key thing is not to panic. All right, now I'm going to grasp the needle tip, and I'm going to pull the cable and slide that other needle tip into place. Swing the tips to the right, pull this tip out. And now we're going to knit front and back of these stitches. One, two, three, and 4. Okay. And then, again, grasp the needle tip, pull that cable. Sorry, this is very noisy. And now we're going to start a new round. And I'm going to pull this back here again, and this time I'm going to pull it so it actually stays in place. And then once you're done, you can always pull that back out on the opposite end. We'll get to there when we get to there. Okay, so pulling this tip out, now we're just going to knit one round even. And a tip for you for circular knitting of any kind, magic loop or even with double pointed needles, is to knit through the back loop for the first stitch and the last stitch on every needle. And that helps pull the stitches tighter around them, and it prevents laddering, which is always a problem, can be a problem with circular knitting. So that is knitted through the back loop, and now we're just going to knit these stitches normally. And this stitch I will knit through the back loop. Again, dropping that tip, grasping this tip. Pull that cable, slide that needle tip into place, and swing the needles to the right. Pull out this needle tip, and again, this stitch will be through the back loop, and the rest will be normal. And this stitch will be through the back loop. So now you can kind of see how the Turkish cast on works for a single cast on. You can see that this is what the right side, this is what will be on the outside of the sock looks like, and this is what the wrong side looks like with all those bumps. That'll be the inside of the sock. All right, so now that you've seen what the single cast on looks like, I'm going to go ahead, pull these off the needles, and show you what it looks like when you do 2 cast-ons at the same time. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and make my slip knot. And before you do a double cast on, it's a really good idea for you to go ahead and create a slip knot for your other cast on. Because trust me, when you have the beginning of the cast on your needles, you are not going to want to put down your needles and create another slip knot. Ask me how I know that, or don't. I'd rather not. It's a sad tale. Anyway, all right, so here's our first cast on. We'll wrap up, over, and down, up, over, and down, up, over, and down, up, over, and down. So we have our 4 loops there. And then we're again going to tuck that yarn end between the needles. So we're just going to scoot that over, and now we're going to do our second one. Again, slip knot on the bottom needle, tighten it. Then we go up the back, around, down the front. Up the back, around, down the front for 2. Up the back, down around the front for 3, and then up the back, down around the front for 4. And we will push that yarn in between the needle tips. Now we're going to go ahead and loop those yarn ends over the needles. We're going to turn it so it's flat, and then we will pull this back needle out, and we will start knitting the cast on. So again, we're going to knit through the back loop into 4 stitches, and when we get to the slip knot again, we're just going to slide it to the right hand needle tip without knitting it. Now we're going to drop that yarn end, and we're going to pick up the other yarn end, and we will do the same thing right over here. Knitting through the back loop, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And again, we're going to slip that slip knot to the right hand needle without knitting it. We'll drop the needle tip, grasp this needle tip, pull the cable, slide that needle tip in place, swing the needle tips to the right, and then we're going to knit these. Pull out that needle tip and knit these through the back loop. 1, 2, 3, 4. Dropping this yarn end, picking up this yarn end. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And now we're dropping this left needle tip, grasping, pulling the cord. I'm going to stop saying that every time. I think you know now how that's done. Okay, so now that we've got the cast on finished, we're going to start the first round. So what we will do for the first round is we're going to knit through the front and back of every loop, again, as I mentioned in the single cast on, and then we will be dropping those slip knots off the needle when we reach them. So again, front and back, 1, front and back, 2, front and back, 3, front and back, 4. And that slip knot is going right off. You can pull the knot out or you can leave it, however you want. And now we're going to do the second cast on. Going to make sure I have the right yarn end. Yes, I do. Okay. That's important. 1, front and back, 1, front and back, 2, front and back, 3, front and back, 4. And off goes the slip knot. And now for the other half of the round. Front and back, 1, front and back, 2, front and back, 3, front and back, 4. Now dropping this yarn end and picking up this one. Front and back, 1, front and back, 2, front and back, 3, front and back, 4. Okay, so that's the end of the first round. And as you might recall from when we demonstrated the single cast on, we'll now be knitting one round even. What I'm going to do now is we need to mark the beginning of the round, because as you can see, there's again an identical number of stitches on each half of the round. So again, I'm taking this yarn tail, and I'm just going to pull it up and tuck it right here to mark the beginning of the round. And I'm going to go ahead and do that for this one as well. Just to mark the beginning of the round. And again, if you have clasping stitch markers, you can use that as well. All right, so again, we're going to knit through the back loop of the first and last stitches on the needle. And the rest of the stitches we're just going to knit as normal. Now in the next round, we're going to be requiring stitch markers. So just so you know what's coming. The toe, without question, is the trickiest part of the spiral rib tube socks, just because that's different knitting than you might be used to. Once we get to the body of the sock, or even actually about halfway through the toe, it's going to feel pretty normal to you, like normal, usual, non-sock knitting. Once you get through the toe, you've finished the toughest part. And isn't it good to know that you will get the hardest part of the sock out of the way right at the start? Okay. So now you see I've got the yarn tails hanging here, and that's how I know I'm at the end of the round. That's where tucking that yarn tail there comes in really handy. Okay, so now we're going to start our toe increases. Well, maybe we will if I can get this needle tip in place. Yeah, sometimes I have a habit of making the end stitches a little too tight, and I've clearly done that here. There we go. Okay. So now for the first round of our increase, we're going to knit in the front and the back of the first stitch. We're going to knit 3 stitches as usual. 1, 2, 3, and then we're going to use our first stitch marker. So we're going to place that right there. Then we're going to knit the next stitch in the front and the back. Knit the next 3 as normal. I'm going to do the same thing for our other sock, so to speak, our other toe. Knit front and back. Knit 3 stitches as usual. Place a stitch marker. Knit front and back. And knit the next 3 stitches. And as you might have guessed, we're going to do the exact same thing on the other half of the round. So here we go, knitting front and back of the first stitch, knitting 3 stitches, placing a stitch marker, knit front and back, and knit 3 stitches. And the same for our other toe. Knit front and back, knit 3 stitches, place our stitch marker, knit front and back, and knit 3 stitches. And then the next round will be even. And after you've knitted that round, you're basically just going to be knitting those 2 rounds repeating those 2 rounds. So this round is going to be knit evenly, and then in the next round I'm going to be knitting into the front and back of the first stitch. I'm going to knit evenly until I get to the stitch marker, and then I will knit the rest of the needle evenly, and both needles again will be exactly the same. And we're going to continue that particular pattern. Hang on just a second. Let me knit across here and then I can demonstrate. Oops. So again, you're going to repeat that pattern. You'll be knitting in the front and the back of the first stitch. You'll knit even until you reach the stitch marker. You'll knit into the front and the back of the next stitch. You'll knit even until you get to the end of the needle. And then you'll do the same thing on the other side. And then the next round after that, you'll knit even like I just did. And you're going to repeat that pattern until the stitches across the toe measure either 3 inches, about that much, I can't measure, but you get the idea, either 3 inches, or if you use metrics and measure in metrics, it's 7.5 centimeters. Approximately that amount, because the most important thing is that the total stitch count is divisible by 6. If you are using a fingering weight yarn, that will be probably about 60 stitches total. So you see 60, you can evenly divide 60 by 6. This is actually worsted weight yarn, which I don't usually use for socks, but since fingering weight is so skinny, I thought it would be easier for you to see what I was doing using worsted weight yarn. I haven't actually tried it with worsted weight yarn. I don't know exactly how many stitches it will be, but that will give you the basic idea. I'm going to go ahead and finish this up until I get to the 3 stitches. I think I might have just said 60 stitches or 6 inches. You know what I mean, 3 inches across. I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I will come back and we will finish up. Okay, so here we are. As you can see, that this is actually quite a bit wider than 3 inches. It's about 3.5 inches. But the important thing is that the stitch count is 48, which is divisible by 6. I did consider stopping at 36, which is divisible by 6, but the toe was about 2.5 inches, and I thought that was a little bit too narrow. So I went ahead and went up to the next number divisible by 6, which was 48. So there are 2 things I want to demonstrate before we wrap this up. One is, you might be wondering what happens if I forget which round I last did. Perhaps you aren't sure if your last round was a straight knitted round or was an increase round where you knitted into the front and the back of the stitches at the front and after the stitch marker. So I'm going to show you what it looks like after an increased round and after a straight knitted round. So if you look very carefully here, you can see that little purl bump right there, or it looks like a purl bump. That is an unmistakable sign of a knit front and back. So this is an increase round. Now, if you look on the other side, if you look right here, the purl bump is all the way down here. It's not right up against this stitch. So that tells you that this right here is a straight knitted round, okay? So if you happen to forget where you are in the round or which round you're on, just take a look at that stitch right there and that will tell you the tail. The other thing I want to demonstrate is this. This is some very tangled yarn ends, and let me tell you, that's inevitable when you're knitting something two at a time. As you can imagine, all this switching back and forth causes these ends to become very tangled. You might already know how to do this, how to untangle yarn ends really quickly, but in case you don't, I'm going to show you. Now what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to get as far back to the balls as you possibly can, and then you're going to pull them like this, and then you're going to pull them apart, and eventually it's going to start to spin like this. And you're just going to kind of swing back and forth so that the needle tips, the ends of the needle tips here, don't get caught up in the yarn. There we go. You might have to shake it a few times, especially if it's really tight like this has gotten. Ah! You don't want to do that. Let me go ahead and loosen this up just a little bit. And of course this has gotten so tight that it's not working. Naturally, once I get the video going. Let's try it like this. You might have to kind of loosen how tightly you're grasping the yarn ends so it doesn't tighten back up. There we go. Now it's going, and now it's loosening up. And there we go. And now the yarn is all nice and untangled. And you will probably have to do that periodically because sometimes the yarn will get so tangled that it will, you know, kind of, so to speak, cut off the circulation to the yarn. You're not able to move it in order to do the stitches. So that is just a really simple, quick, easy way to untangle your yarn ends. Okay, so we are now finished with our toes. Well, I will be finished once I knit this second half of the round. I just left it like that to demonstrate the difference. But our toes are the width that we want. So the next time, in our next lesson, I'm going to show you how to start with the spiral rib stitch. It's super easy, it's super fun, and I can't wait to show you. Until next time, bye-bye.